Okay, tip number 4, please.
Yeah, tip number 4, sure. So this is one, again, I'm hoping these are building on each other. So we had behaviour, we've got warmth, we've got a bit of classroom management in terms of the questioning you're doing. This one is a bit more to do with kind of curriculum and a bit more kind of your long-term vision of what's happening. Now, for me, the tip is develop systematic revision. Now, this is something that I didn't do well in the beginning. You know, I suppose when you first start teaching, you just think, oh, well, I've taught the kids that, they're going to just know it now, you know. And, you know, those of us that have been teaching longer know what a fatal error that is, you know, obviously, particularly with younger and, again, lower ability pupils, because they really don't remember anything for very long. And that also is also just human nature. You know, I don't remember things, you know, weeks later if I haven't been going over it. So we all know about, I assume, you know, forgetting curves, and that knowledge does just decay over time, and you have to keep coming back to it. Now, the thing about doing that revision is that I have found it in my teaching career really useful to try and make that as systematic as possible, to make sure that I'm not accidentally avoiding it, not doing it, missing topics, etc. Now, a big way that we do that at school is through the practice quizzes that I mentioned earlier. So essentially, the way that works is that in the homework that pupils are given each week, which we call a practice quiz, they do questions that are not only what they've done recently, but also a kind of selection of topics from previous weeks, which is then not only in the homework, but gone through in class that Friday. So the teacher has a chance to revise those topics, which essentially makes our Friday lessons a purely revision lesson. It's revision of that week and of previous weeks. Now, what are the other ways we can do that? Well, I think starters are a really also fantastic way to embed systematic revision. We had previously written lots of revision booklets. We've actually now moved a little more towards using, people might be aware of Mr. Carter Maths. It's actually a bit of a throwback for me, because I used to use Mr. Carter Maths in my Teach First days and always found it very useful. And we are again using it at Michaela now, which we didn't used to do for starters, because it just generates a really lovely set of, you know, revision questions which you can customize, and I do recommend that to people who haven't checked it out. And that's again a fantastic way of capturing systematic revision. And another way of doing that is just, you know, just trying essentially to look through your planning and make sure that you're putting your online homework as well as bits of revision, because what, you know, I'm not sure how many schools do online maths. I'm sure it's plenty, you know, Hegarty, Sparks, etc. We've been using Hegarty. We're moving a little bit towards Sparks now, actually, and we've been enjoying the early stages of that. We will look through kind of our long-term plan of what's happening over the year, and we'll be putting, you know, things from previous terms into that online maths homework. So that is essentially purely revision. And, you know, we're lucky, I have to say we are lucky at Michaela, because we have the plan of kind of the full vision of what's happening from start to end, from year 7 all the way to year 11, in terms of what topics we're studying, is all kind of laid out nice and neatly. And we've got all previous practice quizzes saved in our shared area, and it's, you know, it's really well organized, and you can dip into that and you can pull out people's quizzes they've used before, and use the revision that they've been doing. So you're just, the important thing there is that you're really finding ways to cover your blind spots, because as teachers we all have blind spots. We have those topics that either we forget about or that we don't like to teach, and we just need to be reminded what they are. You know, recently I've just been, when I make my practice quizzes, my homework each week, I've just been grabbing, you know, a random exam paper and just going through and thinking, right, what have I not revised in a while, and pulling questions out of it, you know. And that's, again, a very simple but actually pretty effective way to make sure you're not forgetting stuff.
It's fascinating this. So just a couple of points on this one, Charlie. The first, I tend to find, when I'm lucky enough, I watch hundreds of lessons, and I'm very, very fortunate. I'm always fascinated by the start of the lesson, because that's often when retrieval happens. That's often when it's built in, whether teachers use the kind of last lesson, last week, last topic, last year framework, or use something like Mr. Carter or Corbett's 5 a day or something like that. And it's great for retrieval if and only if the kids take it seriously. If the kids are just like kind of waiting for the lesson to actually start proper, and are just either just copying down the answers or just opting out, then they don't get any of these benefits for retrieval. But I'm guessing that you're kind of hyping up the importance of retrieval, and your weekly quizzes, how seriously you take those, must play a part in that. Well, would that be fair to say?
Yeah, that's absolutely true. Now, one thing I would say is that, it's another miracle about working at Michaela, which is that we wouldn't ever get kids not just immediately trusting that what we tell them to do is the right thing to do. So, and I realise that's a bit unique. So, when you work here, I will walk into a maths classroom and I'll say, right, this is what we're doing. And it just happens. The kids just trust that that's what's best for them. And, we've built up that trust over time because they just see that the lessons everywhere are excellent and that they're learning, and then they trust us. So I don't have to do an enormous sell on why is it we're doing each thing that we're doing. But I would say that, if you're in an environment where you do need to sell that, then I would just be straightforward with the kids, because I really do believe that that the retrieval, that revision is absolutely fundamental to doing well at maths. And from a sort of utilitarian point of view, if you're just trying to sell it rationally to the kids, they want to do well in their maths GCSEs, so this is how you do well.
Final question on this one. I'm intrigued by the kind of schedule or the way how you choose what topics and questions to include in the retrieval opportunities, either the do-nows or the quizzes. Now, I really like your idea of taking from an exam paper and thinking what you haven't taught in a while, because what I often find happens, this is another area I'm obsessed with, is the questions that tend to be included are the ones that are either easier for teachers to write or easier for kids to answer. And what I mean by that is, it's very easy just to write a question on add these two fractions together, and it's very easy for the kids to try and answer it just with a pen and paper. Whereas construct an angle bisector, you've got to get the compasses out, the paper out, even measure an angle, anything geometry, or even some of the algebra topics like sketch, plot, table of values for straight lines. You need the grid and the axes and all this kind of thing. So how do you ensure that you don't have the kind of blind spots, to use your phrase, the kind of painful topics in terms of getting the kids to answer aren't left out of these schedules?
Yeah, such a good question. This is something that we have spoken about before in our department meetings, because it's absolutely true that that those topics that are hard to write or answer are the ones that get avoided. And to a certain extent, I think just knowing that that's the case does help. Knowing that that's a weakness. And I would go as far as to say that look, we've not completely solved that problem. Now what I would say though is that one thing you can do for teachers is to just lower the barriers to entry in terms of revising those topics. One really clean way to do that is to have, as we have, a huge bank of previous homeworks that pupils have been given, which include already written into them the structure for those difficult to write questions. So, you were talking about graph questions, all of that, all the kind of graph images and tables, etc. That's already there, and you just kind of lift it, you copy and paste it, and bang, that's in your homework. So on the kind of teacher writing end of that question, I would say that that's how we manage that. And of course, there's wonderful websites like Mr. Corbett Maths, etc., that we do heavily draw from if we're writing questions that are difficult like that. Now, I would say on the pupil end, in terms of they have to grab a compass or a protractor or tracing paper, etc., that I will admit that is a tricky thing that we've not fully solved. Yeah. I would say that the best thing we can do for that is that we're very hot on kids' equipment, so we know they always have the right equipment. And that's a kind of clarity and follow through thing, again, kind of like my first tip, that we do equipment checks every day, so we know that they have the compass, they have the protractor, they have the tracing paper, depending of course on what year group they're in. They don't start with that in year 7, but over time they'll build up that kind of maths specific equipment, and then once we know that they have it, well then we are free to deliver those questions that require those pieces of equipment, and we do huge drives on making sure that that's the case. It was recently the case that we were looking at protractors for year 11, and we go into a huge amount of detail of how can we roll this out, how can we make sure that every pupil picks up that protractor, are we following through with the tensions, how much do they cost in the shop, how are we running it, all those logistical points go into making sure that happens.
Fantastic.